Welcome to the Deep Dives, where we take a monumental stack of history, science, and philosophy and distill it into the knowledge you need, fast.
Today, we're embarking on one of the most astonishing journeys through 17th century intellectual history. We are unpacking the life of Blaise Pascal.
A French polymath who, well, fundamentally shaped the modern world in mathematics, physics, computing, and literature.
And he did it all before his life was tragically cut short at the age of 39.
39 years. It's barely enough time for most of us to figure out a career path.
And yet Pascal was an inventor, a physicist who disproved ancient philosophy, a profound religious writer, and a literary revolutionary all at once.
So our mission today, with this huge stack of sources, is to unpack how one person could lay the groundwork for modern calculus, probability theory, public transit, and computer engineering.
And then after all that, pivot his immense genius entirely toward theology.
It's an incredible story. And what's so fascinating is that his genius was never just abstract, was it?
Not at all. His origins were very practical. His father, Etienne Pascal, was part of the administrative class, the noblesse de robe. He was a royal tax commissioner.
So that environment, that world of numbers and administration.
Exactly. It was steeped in the excruciating reality of manual, often chaotic calculations. And that's what directly pushed Pascal toward finding a better way, a radical, automated solution.
It really is the ultimate example of necessity birthing invention. We're going to see how, financial chaos in 17th century France literally drove him to invent the mechanical calculator.
And how a challenge from an aristocratic gambler sparked the entire field of probability.
It's a recurring theme, isn't it? Intensely practical problems leading to these huge, world-changing, abstract solutions.
We'll start with his astonishing beginnings as a child prodigy, trace his path through his inventions, then move to his foundational physics experiments that really settled the centuries-old debate over the vacuum.
And finally, we'll get into the dramatic religious conversion that birthed two of the most influential literary and philosophical masterpieces in the French language.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Pascal was born in Clermont-Ferrand in 1623.
His mother died when he was just 3, and his father, Etienne, made this really pivotal decision. He decided to educate Blaise and his 2 sisters himself when they all moved to Paris in 1631.
And the sources are all very clear on this. Young Pascal had an extraordinary, almost alarming intellectual ability, especially for math.
But the defining anecdote of his childhood is the story of restriction. His father, who was a decent mathematician himself, actually tried to keep math away from him.
Which sounds completely counterintuitive.
Right. Why would you do that? Was he afraid his son would become, too specialized too early?
It seems to be a bit of that. Etienne had this idea that a proper classical education languages literature had to come first. So he actually removed all the math textbooks from the house.
He locked them away.
Locked them away and refused to even discuss the subject. The plan was he'd teach Blaise math when he turned 15.
But a mind like that, well, it finds a way, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. The story goes that Blaise, who was only about 12, just started figuring it out on his own. He was using charcoal on a tile floor.
Just drawing shapes.
Drawing shapes, making up his own names for them, like bar for a line and round for a circle. And by the time his father found him, he had independently rediscovered Euclid's first 32 propositions.
Without any books.
Without any books. He had essentially reverse-engineered the fundamentals of geometry up to the point of proving that the angles in a triangle add up to 2 right angles, all on his own.
That is just... It's a hallmark of a mind operating on a completely different level.
Yeah.
He didn't just learn geometry, he recreated it.
And that led, just 4 years later, to his first serious mathematical work. The Essay on Conics. In 1640, he was 16.
16 years old and publishing serious mathematics. What was the core idea in that work?
The cornerstone was something he called the mystic hexagram. We know it today as Pascal's theorem.
And what does that state?
It's an incredibly elegant proof. Basically, if you draw any random hexagon inside a conic section, a circle, an ellipse, whatever, the 3 points where the opposite sides intersect will always lie on a single straight line, the Pascal line.
It's one of those things that sounds complex, but is visually just perfect once you see it drawn out.
And the reaction at the time tells you everything. The great René Descartes,
The father of modern philosophy.
he was so astounded he was convinced that Pascal's father had written it. He simply couldn't believe a 16-year-old was capable of that kind of original thought.
So he basically accused him of fraud.
Pretty much. When he was assured it really was the son's work, Descartes gave this backhanded compliment, saying it was impressive, but that other related topics would scarcely occur to a 16-year-old child.
Incredible. So he's already fighting for recognition just because he's so far ahead of his age.
And from this very abstract theoretical brilliance, his journey takes a very practical turn. And that brings us to the financial crisis the Pascal family faced.
Right, because they were initially quite comfortable when they moved to Paris.
Very. Etienne had sold his official position for over 65,000 livres, a huge sum. But then, in 1638, Cardinal Richelieu, who was desperate for money for the 30 Years' War, defaulted on government bonds.
And that just wiped them out.
It wiped out most of their wealth, their fortune plummeted, it was a crippling blow.
So to recover, Etienne gets a new job.
He's appointed the King's Commissioner of Taxes in Rouen in 1639, and Rouen was a mess. Tax revolts, chaotic records.
And his job was to sort through it all. We're talking endless, grueling calculations.
Just endless. He was completely overwhelmed. And this is where Blaise, seeing his father struggling, applies his mind to the problem. This is the origin of the Pascaline, around 1642.
He's not even 19 yet.
It's not. And he builds this mechanical calculator. It was a box with a series of geared wheels. You'd dial in the numbers, and the machine would perform addition and subtraction, even handling the carryover automatically.
It's one of the very first mechanical calculators in history. The other was Wilhelm Schickard's, but his was lost in a fire.
So Pascal's is the one that survives and evolves. He spent a decade perfecting it, building about 20 finished machines. He even presented one to Christina, Queen of Sweden.
But here's the friction point. If it was such a pioneering invention, why didn't it take off?
Well, it was a mix of things. First, it was mechanically very complex. It could jam, especially if you tried to use it too quickly.
And the accountants said they were already very fast with their manual methods.
Exactly. Second, it was a bit cumbersome to use. The process wasn't as intuitive as, say, an abacus for people who are already trained experts.
And the third factor, I'm guessing, was cost.
The cost. It was extraordinarily expensive to build and maintain. You could hire a whole room of clerks for less. So it failed as a commercial product. It didn't become a widespread tool.
It became what? A status symbol.
A sophisticated toy and a status symbol for the wealthy elite. It was a brilliant technological leap, but the world just wasn't economically ready for it.
It's a classic story in the history of technology. You could be right, but right too early.
So after this foray into mechanical engineering, Pascal's work pivots back into abstract mathematics, but again, it's triggered by a very practical problem.
And this time it's not taxes, it's gambling.
Gambling. In 1654, he starts this now famous correspondence with Pierre de Fermat, another giant of French mathematics.
And the whole thing gets started because a guy named Chevalier de Marais, an aristocratic gambler, has a couple of puzzles he can't solve.
And one of them, the one that really ignited this new field, was the problem of points.
Okay, can you break down the scenario for us?
Certainly. Imagine you and I are playing a game of coin flips. The first person to win 5 rounds gets the whole prize pot.
Okay.
But let's say we have to stop early. I've won 4 rounds and you've won 3. The game's not over. How do we divide the prize money fairly?
The old way was just to divide it based on the rounds we'd already won, right? So like a 4-to-3 ratio.
Exactly. And that's wrong. Pascal and Fermat's breakthrough was realizing the division has to be based on the future, on the probability each of us has of winning from that point forward.
So you calculate all the possible ways the rest of the game could play out.
Precisely. And that correspondence, that back and forth, gave birth to the mathematical theory of probability.
The impact of that is just. It's hard to overstate. It goes so far beyond the gambling table.
Oh, absolutely. The core concept they developed, what we call expected value, it's the foundation for how we quantify risk and uncertainty.
So you're talking about insurance, financial markets, modern economics.
All of it. Actuarial science.
Yeah.
The roots trace directly back to Pascal and Fermat trying to solve a gambler's dilemma in 1654.
And it also laid some of the groundwork for Leibniz and the later development of calculus.
It did. The focus on infinitesimals and approaching limits was a key step. So again, you have a mechanical calculator leading towards computing and a gambling problem leading towards higher analysis.
And that same year, 1654, was just incredibly productive for him. That's also when he wrote his treatise on the arithmetical triangle.
Right, the work that details what we all know as Pascal's triangle.
Now, he didn't invent the triangle itself, did he?
No, the pattern was known for centuries in China, India, Persia. Pascal's contribution was to systematically explore its properties and apply them to his new work on probability.
And in that same treatise, he did something else, something methodologically revolutionary.
This was the really huge leap. He provided the first explicit, formalized statement of the principle of mathematical induction.
Okay, for those of us who haven't thought about that since high school, can you give us a simple analogy?
Think of it like a line of dominoes, an infinite line. Mathematical induction is how you prove that all the dominoes will fall. You only have to do two things.
Okay, what's the first?
First is the base case. You have to prove you can knock over the very first domino, that the statement is true for the first instance.
Simple enough. And the second part?
That's the inductive step. You have to prove that if any given domino falls, it will always knock over the next one. That if the statement is true for some number k, it must be true for k plus 1.
So, if you can knock over the first one, and you know each one knocks over the next, you've proven it for the entire infinite line.
Exactly. It's a way to formalize absolute certainty in mathematics, which is, as you said, incredibly ironic given what else happens in 1654.
Because right at this peak of his mathematical powers, he just stops.
That's the great pivot. 1654 is the year of his definitive religious conversion, the night of the memorial. After that, he mostly gave up work in mathematics.
But not entirely. There's one last kind of bizarre mathematical episode a few years later.
In 1658. And it was prompted by a severe toothache.
A tooth.
He was in agony. And to distract himself from the pain, he started thinking about the cycloid. That's the curve traced by a point on a rolling circle. It was a huge mathematical puzzle at the time.
And as he's deep in thought,
His toothache just vanished completely. And Pascal, being in this new religious frame of mind, took it as a heavenly sign.
divine approval to keep working on the math problem.
Yes. He worked furiously and wrote an entire essay on the area and volume of the cycloid in just 8 days. He even proposed a public contest with cash prizes to solve related problems.
So even a brief return to his first passion yielded significant results.
It did. It showed that the mind was still there, even if his focus had shifted heavenward.
It's just staggering that this same person, at the same time, was also revolutionizing our understanding of the physical world. I mean, this is the work that gave us the scientific unit, the Pascal.
His physics work was also incredibly practical. It led to 2 inventions we still use every day, the syringe and the hydraulic press.
The hydraulic press is based on Pascal's law, right? Can you break that down?
Sure. Pascal's law says that if you apply pressure to a fluid in a closed container, that pressure is transmitted equally to every part of the fluid. More importantly, the pressure depends on the height of the fluid column, not its total weight.
And that's how you get force multiplication, like in a car jack.
That's the perfect modern analogy. You apply a small force on a small piston, and that pressure is transmitted to a much larger piston, which magnifies the force and lets you lift a 2-ton car with ease.
And he had this very dramatic way of demonstrating this, the Pascal's barrel experiment.
A fantastic illustration. He took a sturdy water-filled barrel and attached a very long, very thin tube to the top.
A tube that went all the way up to the 3rd story of a building?
Right, and then he started pouring water into just that tiny tube. The volume of water he added was minuscule.
But the height of the water column created immense pressure.
So much pressure that the barrel burst. It proved that pressure depends on height, not volume. It was a spectacular way to shatter common sense intuition.
But his biggest contribution to physics was settling a debate that had been raging since ancient Greece, the vacuum.
This was a battle against dogma. The Aristotelian view, which Descartes also held, was horror vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum. The belief was that true nothingness couldn't exist. Any space had to be filled with some kind of invisible matter.
But then Evangelista Torricelli's experiments with mercury barometers started to suggest otherwise.
Torricelli's work was the spark. Pascal picked it up and ran with it. In 1647, he published a paper arguing that a true vacuum did exist above the mercury in a barometer tube, and it was the weight of the air pressing down that held the mercury up.
But the old guard, the Cartesians, they weren't convinced.
No, they argued that some invisible vapor or substance was filling that space, so Pascal needed definitive, irrefutable proof.
And his hypothesis was brilliantly simple.
Just beautiful. He reasoned that if air has weight, then there must be less of it on top of a mountain than at the bottom. So atmospheric pressure should decrease as you go up.
And he had the perfect laboratory right there, the Puy de Dôme mountain.
The only problem was his own health was terrible. He was often too sick to do things himself. So he recruited his brother-in-law, Florent Perrier, to conduct the experiment in 1648.
And the methodology they used was so rigorous for its time.
It really was. Perrier gathered a bunch of credible witnesses, prepared 2 identical barometers, and took a baseline reading at the lowest point in town, Critically, he left one barometer there as a control.
To make sure the weather didn't just change during the day.
Exactly. Then he and his party climbed the mountain, almost 5,000 feet.
And when they got to the summit?
The result was immediate and decisive. The mercury column was more than 3 inches lower than it was at the base.
A huge drop.
A massive drop. He repeated the experiment 5 times, all with the same result. When he got back down, the mercury was back to its original height. It was conclusive proof.
The weight of the air was real and the vacuum was real. It permanently settled the debate.
And Pascal immediately replicated it on a smaller scale in Paris by carrying a barometer up the bell tower of a church and seeing the mercury drop.
And his response to his critics from this period is one of the clearest statements of the modern scientific method.
It's a fantastic quote on falsifiability. He said, essentially, that for a hypothesis to be true, it's not enough that all the phenomena fit it. If it leads to something that contradicts even a single phenomenon, that's enough to prove it's false.
Science progresses by seeking disproof, not just confirmation. A profound idea. And of course, the legacy of all this work is the SI unit for pressure, the Pascal.
Which brings us to that great turning point. The same rigorous mind that insisted on empirical proof in the physical world is the one that would soon turn away from reason in the realm of faith.
The seeds for that were planted a bit earlier, weren't they, in 1646?
Yes, during a family crisis. His father broke his hip, and the 2 doctors who treated him were devout followers of Jansenism.
Jansenism. That was a very austere, rigorous movement within Catholicism, right?
Very much so. It stressed human sinfulness and the absolute necessity of divine grace for salvation. Pascal was deeply influenced by talking with these doctors and reading Jansenist works. That was his first conversion.
But it didn't fully stick at first. After his father died, he went through what's called his worldly period.
And this led to a really intense conflict with his sister, Jacqueline, who he was very close to.
She wanted to join the Jansenist convent at Port Royal.
She was resolute. But Pascal resisted fiercely. He relied on her, and he was also deeply suspicious of the convent. The sources suggest he felt that it had begun to smell like a cult.
And the fight was over her inheritance, which she had signed over to the convent.
He eventually gave in, but it caused him immense turmoil and led to a period of spiritual isolation, which all builds up to the main event.
November 23rd, 1654.
That night, between 10:30 and 12:30, Pascal had an intense 2-hour mystical experience that changed him forever.
And we only know about it because of the note he scribbled down, the memorial. It starts with just one word: fire.
And the key line rejects the intellectualized God of philosophy. Fire. God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, not of the philosophers and the scholars.
It was a direct, overwhelming experience of God. And the personal detail of what he did with that note is just mind-blowing.
It is. He sewed it into the lining of his coat. And every time he got a new coat, he would unpick the stitches and sew it into the new one. No one knew it existed.
It was a completely private covenant, a secret he kept until a servant found it after he died.
From that point on, his work is almost entirely religious. He immediately starts writing his first great literary work, the Provincial Letters.
Which was a blistering attack on something called casuistry. What exactly was that?
Casuistry was a method of moral reasoning, especially popular with the Jesuits, that tried to resolve ethical dilemmas by applying general principles to very specific cases.
And Pascal saw this as just a way to create moral loopholes.
He thought it was using complex reasoning to justify moral laxity, to excuse sin, and he attacked it with devastating effect.
The letters were published under a pseudonym, and they were brilliant. He used humor, mockery, vicious satire.
They became a masterpiece of French prose. They were so powerful that King Louis XIV ordered the book to be burned.
And yet, even the Pope, while publicly condemning them, was supposedly privately convinced by Pascal's arguments.
That's what the sources say. They were just that persuasive. And one of the most famous quotes comes from these letters, his apology for one of them being too long.
I have made this letter longer than usual only because I have not had the time to make it shorter. An iconic line.
And that leads into his unfinished magnum opus, the Pensées, or Thoughts. This was meant to be his great defense of Christianity.
An apology. And he had a very specific philosophical strategy to convert the unbeliever.
A brilliant one. He planned to trap the reader between 2 opposing philosophies: Pyrrhonism, which is radical skepticism, and Stoicism, which is radical self-sufficiency through reason.
So he would use one to dismantle the other.
Exactly. He'd use the skeptic Montaigne to show the flaws in the Stoic's confidence, and use the Stoic Epictetus to show the contradictions in the skeptic's position. The goal was to drive the reader to despair.
To show that human reason on its own fails when it comes to the big questions.
And that failure creates the need for a divine answer. And within this framework is his most famous idea.
Pascal's wager.
This is where his work on probability theory crashes into his theology. He argues that since reason can't prove or disprove God's existence, you have to make a bet.
You bet that God exists, or you bet that he doesn't.
And then you calculate the stakes. If you bet on God and you're right, your gain is infinite eternal salvation. If you're wrong, your loss is finite. A few earthly pleasures.
But if you bet against God and you're wrong,
your loss is infinite, eternal damnation. So from a purely probabilistic standpoint, the only rational bet is to believe. The infinite payoff just dominates the entire equation.
it's a pragmatic argument. He's not saying it will make you believe, but it gives you a reason to start acting as if you do.
And this preference for faith over pure reason is why he clashed so strongly with Descartes. He famously wrote, "I cannot forgive Descartes," because Descartes used God to get his system started and then, didn't need God anymore.
For Pascal, God wasn't a philosophical premise. God had to be felt in the heart.
Which is all captured in that perfect, timeless quote, thought number 200.
Man is only a reed, the weakest in nature, but he is a thinking reed.
We are fragile and mortal, but our consciousness, our ability to think, gives us infinite dignity. It's the ultimate summary of human misery and human greatness.
And even with all this going on, he had one last practical invention left in him.
One last one. In 1661, less than a year before he died, he inaugurated one of the world's first public transportation systems.
The carrousel à cinq sols in Paris.
Horse-drawn carriages, like buses, that ran on fixed routes for a fixed price of 5 sols.
And he established the core principles we still use: fixed route, fixed price, and crucially, a fixed schedule. The carriages left on time, even if they were empty.
That reliability is key. Now, like the Pascaline, it wasn't a long-term commercial success. The lines closed down by 1675. But the concept, the invention of the system of public transit, is all his.
It's a final testament to the sheer breadth of his mind. But his time was running out. His lifelong health problems were getting much, much worse.
And he embraced a severe ascetic lifestyle. He came to believe that sickness is the natural state of Christians, and often refused doctors, seeing suffering as something to be endured.
He died in Paris on August 19, 1662. He was only 39. His last words were, "May God never abandon me."
The autopsy revealed just how much he had suffered physically. Grave problems with his stomach and other organs, along with damage to his brain, which likely caused the chronic, debilitating headaches he had his whole life.
An incredibly short life, but the legacy is just immense. His name is everywhere.
It really is. In science, the Pascal unit of pressure. In technology, the Pascal programming language. NVIDIA's Pascal microarchitecture.
And in culture, too. The chameleon in the movie Tangled is named Pascal, the otter in Animal Crossing.
And just last year, in 2023, Pope Francis dedicated an entire apostolic letter to him. He remains this towering figure, a scientific giant whose ultimate conclusions were theological.
The man who started out trying to help his father with tax ledgers ended up systematizing chaos itself with probability, and then arguing the greatest truths can't be calculated at all.
It's a remarkable story of synthesis. Tax calculations gave us the calculator. A gambler's problem gave us probability. A toothache gave us a key insight into the psychoid. His life was a relentless pursuit of truth, wherever it led.
He truly was the great synthesizer of math, science, and faith. We have to go back to that quote. Man is only a reed, the weakest in nature, but he is a thinking reed. His physical form was weak, but his mind changed our world.
And that profound tension in his own life between rational certainty and spiritual submission leaves us with a final thought for you to consider. Pascal, the brilliant mind who codified certainty in math and science, ultimately concluded that certainty in life's biggest questions can only be grasped through intuition and a wager. So what fundamental questions in your own life do you rely on intuition or a wager to answer, knowing that reason alone can't give you the proof you might want?
That's a deep dive for another day. Thank you for joining us. We hope you feel thoroughly informed and perhaps profoundly curious.